back. Thank you for being with us this morning. We appreciate your attendance. And I want to talk a little bit about this issue in Egypt. And the reason I want to touch on it, and this is our final segment for the day, the reason I want to address this is because we find ourselves in a similar conundrum just earlier in the calendar, if you will. You know, Egypt is a nation that has been under subjugation and under control and under the thumb of oppressors and tyrants for, I guess, all of its existence. I mean, you've had emperors in that country and dictators there ruling there basically forever. And they're so used to it that they have a hard time recognizing freedom when it's, sitting right in front of their nose. And yet, they were smart enough to recognize the dangers of the theocracy they were entering into with Morsi. And, 33 million out of 85 million people rose up and said, we're going to do something about it. Now, our administration promoted and sponsored Morsi, who is the Muslim Brotherhood, the de facto leader of the Muslim Brotherhood. So, by sponsoring Morsi, we, in fact, sponsored the Muslim Brotherhood, right? I mean, you can't say we sponsored Morsi, but not his religious and ideological beliefs. That'd be like saying we sponsored Obama, but we don't believe in what he believes in politically. That's just not true. So, if we've sponsored Morsi, and now, by public acclaim, he's been tossed out, what does that mean for our approach over there now? In other words, just the other day, you had John McCain and Lindsey Graham go over there. And there's been a lot of talk in the press lately about what transpired during their meetings. And there's some leaking here going on that these guys were over there to attempt to figure out some way to, cut Morsi loose so that they could relieve pressure on the whole argument, right? In other words, the Brotherhood wants him released, and they want to be reinstated back into power, and the opposing side, who is, backed by the military in this case, doesn't want anything to do with Morsi, and they want to prosecute him for crimes against humanity. Whether we know all the facts of that or not is immaterial. What is important is that we understand the overall scene, if you will, the scenario under which they're operating. And I want to tie that back to our situation because we're not there yet, but we're pretty dag-nab close. What you have to, the difference between what we have in our time, in our situation, in the timeline, and what Egypt's situation is that, one, we have an understanding and a basic foundational knowledge and expectation of freedom and liberty that they've never had in Egypt or in most other oppressed countries. In other words, every American is born with the idea that you have the right of free speech, that you have the right to worship the religion of your choice, and that you have the right to, redress your grievances with your government. You have the right to bear arms. You have the right to a Fourth Amendment level of security and privacy. You have the right to, to claim the Fifth Amendment and say, I'm not going to incriminate myself. You have the right to, protection from cruel and unusual punishment through the Eighth Amendment. There's a whole bunch of things that Americans kind of just take for granted, if you will. Egyptians don't. Because cruel and unusual punishment is a way of life over there. And it is in many, many, many other places. But what we see is an uprising that was necessary and desired, but poorly executed. And that is how I'm going to tie this back to us. We are reaching, and we've already surpassed the window of the constitutional crisis in the United States of America. I mean, anyone who's going to be intellectually honest has got to admit that we are beyond the point where we are operating within the boundaries of the Constitution. Even Congress will tell you that. I mean, they say flat out, most of the things we do, and this is a quote, by the way, type it into your browser and search for it. I can't remember who said it, but most of the things we do aren't constitutional. And that was I believe it was a senator. They know that we're outside the boundaries of the Constitution. And that, truthfully, creates a constitutional crisis. Because if we allow it to go on unchecked and indefinite, then at some point in time you got to recognize that, tyranny will come home to roost. And because we've allowed it to go on so long, I think we're pretty close to that day now. At some point, the American people are going to say, you know what, we don't really think this is appropriate. And we don't like the spying. And we don't want all of our personal information out in the Obama Data Care Hub, which is insecure, and you're allowing thieves to steal our personal information. And we don't like the fact that you're giving our private information in terms of our driver's licenses and our identification to a third-party company who's sharing that with third-party nations that we don't have any relationship with, and we don't want our information out there. We're not an open book for the entire, that's the equivalent of saying, you know what, if you want to look at my wife naked, you can. You wouldn't tolerate that, and we shouldn't either. So, we don't need a voyeuristic globe looking at Americans' personal, private, secure information, either our email or our identification or our health care or anything else. So we've reached this point where we're in constitutional crisis. And I think anyone who's a true constitutional authority and a real constitutional professor or educator or knowledgeable about it would agree with the position that we are, for the most part, operating way outside the constitutional boundaries, and we have for a very long time. And if we acknowledge that, then that, of course, raises the specter of the constitutional crisis. You can't have it both ways. We either are or we aren't. And if we are, then we're in a constitutional crisis. The problem is that the Egyptians, when they said we've had enough and we're looking for freedom, they went into this unplanned. And so by going into it unplanned, it was a movement. And they just finally said, you know what, we have had enough. And they marched in the streets until the government actually began to attack them. And because they didn't have first of all, they don't have a constitution that says that they really own and run the country, right? But secondarily, they didn't have the power to push back against the government who was, shooting them in the streets for all intents and purposes, or beating them or whatever. So the military stepped in on their behalf. And now it's being, of course, labeled as a coup by some and, whatever. The point is this. We cannot allow that same mistake to occur in the United States of America. And a mistake it is. Because what they weren't is prepared. They weren't prepared with the appropriate level of replacement for the Morsi administration. They had, kind of a semblance of people that, agreed to step up. But the military ended up appointing people. And that's dangerous. We know that at some point in time, those of us who are, on the inside know of this and are willing to see the handwriting on the wall, read it and recognize it for what it says, we know that there's going to be a collapse at some point in the future. And probably sooner rather than later, but whatever. Even if you don't agree when, as long as you agree. And the real butt of this thing is that we have to make sure that we have a plan of succession. Because if we don't, what will happen here is what's happening there right now. Anarchy. Some people out there think it's a good thing. I think if you think through that, you'll disagree. But more importantly, the government, the military had to step in to prevent it from descending into complete and total civil war. Now, guess what? It's almost civil war anyway. And so what I want you to be cognizant of, and I've espoused on this before, I've claimed repeatedly, and I'd love to see some folks join with us on this. I don't have all the answers. I've only got the kernel of an idea. I don't have the power or the money or the resources to pull it all together. But as a collective group of true patriots who understand the nature of where we are in terms of a timeline, it's incumbent on all of us to put all of our efforts together to make sure that we're properly prepared for what's going to happen, even though we may not know when and exactly what the particular circumstances are going to be. But even if the government is doing their best and they still fail at it, we should have a plan to put a constitutional republic back in place so that we're not caught here with our pants down. That's why I have suggested and recommended and thrown the idea out there repeatedly that all of the different organizations that are out there that are not Republican and Democrat, because that duopoly is lost to us. Let's just acknowledge it. The hardcores, the true ideologues of both the Republican and the Democrat Party, they're not really interested in what's right for the country. They're interested in what's right for the party. And I, for one, don't think party is going to save the United States of America or the Republic. We've given them 150 years of opportunity to make it happen, and they've completely and utterly, abjectly bungled it. So why should we even consider them to be part of the new mix? That's, I guess, the long and the short of it. So, assuming that's the case, then those people who are already outside the boundaries of those two parties should be working collectively together and joining hands and joining forces and resources and time and management and money and energy and everything else to plan ahead. When I say plan ahead, I mean we should be seeking candidates who will be replacements when this whole thing blows up or just collapses like a house of cards. Doesn't have to necessarily go pow. It might implode too. And we need to be thoughtful about that, cognizant, and recognize that we don't know what direction it's going to take. But what we do know is that it can't consistently go on forever. We've reached the point where, for all intents and purposes, this is beyond salvage. We are unsustainable, financially and politically, perhaps morally, and I'm pretty sure socially. So, what do we do? Do we sit here just whining and railing and ranting and complaining and trying to hold back the tidal wave? Knowing that the tidal wave is 1,000 feet tall and we're sitting here with a stop sign trying to hold it all back? Or do we take action and begin to put a plan of action together as we see the tidal wave coming in from the ocean? To me, that makes more sense. So what we should be doing is blowing up a tire tube that will allow us to ride it out and come out on top. We don't have time to build a seawall that will stop it. But we have to figure out how we're going to get through it politically, as a nation, economically. I mean, if the whole thing blows up tomorrow morning, how are you going to feed your family? How are you going to feed yourself? How are you going to go to work? How are you going to pay for the car? How are you going to pay for the house? How are you going to pay for the boat you got? I mean, at some point, we have to start acknowledging that there is going to be a tomorrow. There's a day after tomorrow, right? So if tomorrow says there's an economic collapse or a political collapse, what then? I mean, they've got people in place who are planning for it. And I can tell you this, their plans don't include your input. So, what do we do? Well, I think, and you can disagree if you like, but unless you have a better plan, we should run with something. And I think that the first thing that we can do is put leadership heads together in those groups that are outside of the traditional two-party duopoly system on a political arena first and foremost. Because you can't have economics and the rest of that if you don't have leadership of some sort. And government is a necessary thing. We want government. We don't want anarchy. We just want severely limited government, right? We want, at least I want, microscopic federal government. I want a federal government that operates within the 6, well, it depends on how you want to look at it, 6 to 19 enumerated powers. But outside of that, leaves us all alone. I want states that operate on the same principle, but slightly larger, not microscopic, but maybe miniature. I want a state that is there to make sure that, you know, the roads are paved and that things are done, and we're willing to pay for that. But I don't want them interfering in my life. I don't want them, you know, kicking in my door because they don't like the school I send my kid to, or the fact that I don't send my kid to school at all and homeschool them. I don't want them to come in and shut my farm down because I sell raw milk. I don't want them to tax me to death and then squander that money on projects and things which really are not necessary when there is so much that actually is necessary. I don't want them giving our money away and our treasure and to cronies because they owe them. And I think most Americans would agree with that. I want support for people who are truly helpless. I want, you know, the ability to step in and give someone a helping hand up. But I don't want that helping hand to be viewed as a career move by the recipient. I mean, I get unemployment. I get welfare to a certain extent. I get food stamps. I get all of that. But you see, first of all, those aren't really purviews of the federal government. And we can take this out to the umpteenth degree. But, I mean, just to use those examples, they're not federal government programs. Those are state programs. You live in the state, you pay taxes in the state. I would rather pay more taxes to my state and have my state manage it because they're more in contact with me. I've got a closer reach to them. I can drive to Jefferson City. I can't drive to D.C. So the goal of all Americans, irrespective of where you stand on the political spectrum, should be for us to have a plan that allows us to address what happens the day after tomorrow. And I encourage Tea Party groups. I encourage the Constitutional Party, the Libertarian Party, to put their heads together and combine their efforts. I get it. You're going to have some ideological issues. Libertarians believe, you know, abortion is none of their business, and constitutionalists believe that, you know, abortion is an absolute non-starter. But, you know, really, is that division in ideology worthy of losing our republic over? Really? I mean, at the end of the day, can we put those differences aside long enough to say we are united on a couple of things? One, we need a government that's respectful of us and doesn't squander our resources and treat us as chattel. We need a government that's responsive to our needs, but not oppressive. Can't we say that? And then can't we put a plan of action together that says, this is how we're going to approach it. We're going to find, interview, seek out, and qualify men and women who can be in the role of government post a collapse, regionally and on a national basis. That those people are going to have a drive and a motivation which is not driven necessarily by re-election, bribery, coercion, corruption, but by their true patriotic intent and value that they give to our nation. And the overall goal being, of course, the preservation of our republic. I think we'd have a lot more success than some naysayers who've responded to me on this issue. You know, I've had a lot of people say to me, oh, it's too big a project. It can't get off the ground. Well, I get it's a big project. But we're going to pick up the pieces with a plan or we're going to pick up the pieces without a plan. Which is smarter? I mean, you know, should we be organized now while we still can communicate, while we still have telephone systems and gasoline available at our disposal, and revenue and money that we can use to plan and project? Or should we wait until it's collapsed and trucks don't run and everybody's so busy scrambling just to eat or fight that it's too late? I don't know. I personally, I think we'd be better off to have a plan. I would hope that you would agree with me. And the logical people to participate in that are the people who are not participating in it today. These are the disenfranchised, the ones who feel like we don't have a say in government. We don't have a lobbyist on our behalf. And I dare say, guess what? That's the vast majority of Americans. The vast majority is the one who doesn't have a lobbyist. Sure, this group has a lobbyist, that small group has a lobbyist, but we, the people, as a general group, we don't. It's supposed to be Congress, but it's not. It's supposed to be your state representatives and your state senators. But come on, it really isn't. They've long ago abdicated their role away. They're now just sitting up there as figureheads, you know, in a career, which you pay for and have no input on. So aren't we better off to say that post this destruction, or post the collapse, or post whatever you want to call it, that we've got a group of people who are like-minded, focused on the right goals, may approach it from different perspectives, but we've all got the same goal. And that is a well-ordered, civil, peaceful society. That's all we've got to start with, folks. That's what our founders started with. They didn't agree on the approach in many cases. In fact, they had physical fist fights. I mean, here in the age of you know, decorum, I yield the floor to my friend, who I really hate his guts. I mean, you know, when they yielded the floor and it came behind a chair. These guys and women, they had different approaches to the solution, but the solution for all of them was the same: a civil, well-ordered, peaceful, beneficial society that had the rule of law as its foundational base. And I'm telling you right now that I believe that the Libertarians and the Constitutionalists and the Green Party, maybe even, and the Tea Party groups, I believe that we are intelligent, open, wise enough, mindful enough, intelligent enough to put our efforts together to create something better than what we have right now. Right now we have nothing. If this thing blows up tomorrow morning, we're sunk. So where do we go from here? Well, I mean, listen, I'd be more than happy to try to figure out all the answers for you, but, you know, I don't have the time, I don't have the knowledge, I don't have the skill set. I've only got some great ideas. I'd like to see everybody who's a preferred candidate, who is qualified and been vetted and properly, you know, I mean, they have to be qualified, right? But I'd like to see them sign a contract with the electorate that says, if I violate your trust, as liquidated damages to this contract, I give up my right to remain here, even though I may have a constitutional right to stand in that position when I've betrayed you. But I, as liquidated damages, will leave. I swear up front that I will follow a term limit that may not be imposed by the Constitution, but this is my commitment and contract with you. Those are the basic things that we should be talking about now. What will all this look like then? And how do we set it up so that we're not fighting against ourselves and with ourselves at the loss of everyone? Please give some thought to it. If you're a member of a Tea Party organization, Libertarian or Constitution Party, or even the Green Party or any of the other unnamed parties, by all means, let's talk about it. Mike at americasvoicenow.org. Send me an email. Let's have a discussion. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. You can find us on the web at americasvoicenow.org. You can find our website, our Facebook page, at facebook.com/America's Voice Now. Please join it, even if you're not a member, you can still read the stuff up there. And you can find this and every other show at youtube.com/America's Voice Now. Please share this video with friends, especially party members. Not Republican and Democrat, but other parties. Thanks so much. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.